The Where Our Minds Wander podcast may contain sensitive content and explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Greetings, fellow wanderers, to the places our minds wander.
Where strange lights speed beyond reason across a clear night sky.
The house at the end of the road where disembodied voices whisper and strange noises make the living shiver.
Lurking shadows hiding on the edge of the woods just outside your back door.
Odd, true events throughout time that lead you down the rabbit hole. I'm Wes.
And I'm Beth.
And this is Where Our Minds Wander. Hello and welcome to Where Our Minds Wander, all you fellow wanderers. I'm Wes, and that's my wife and co-host, Beth.
Hello, everyone. We hope all you wanderers had a wonderful holiday.
We had a pretty good Christmas. You know, I got to say, I'm glad it's over with, because
It was a good Christmas, but I'm glad it's done.
Well, you know, I kind of feel like I need a vacation after Thanksgiving and Christmas. It's such a long stretch. It gets kind of hectic.
It does.
But, you know, New Year's is just around the corner, and that's always fun.
It can be. Wes and I had some downtime together while on Christmas break to research some interesting subjects, and hopefully you like them as much as we enjoyed putting them together for you.
That's right. So sit back, get comfy, and let us take you to where our minds wandered this week. For many Americans, skeletons are brought out at Halloween time. You know, the plastic kind, purchased from your local department store. We tend to use them as spooky decoration, and then we put them away after Halloween's over with.
Well, some of us do.
Well, yes, unless you're like us. You know, we have a few that stay out all year round. 2 are sitting at a tarot card table. One of them is dressed up as a tarot card reader, and the other one is a lovely Victorian lady receiving her tarot card reading. And then we have a pirate guarding his treasure chest.
And we also have a Victorian gentleman wearing a top hat and cloak, sitting in his favorite leather chair, smoking a cigar, enjoying his favorite alcoholic spirits.
Well, he tends to keep me company in the living room bar during the evening as I'm enjoying my favorite beverage. I know, it sounds rather odd, but they bring a smile to your face and are friends when they visit. People tend to have a squeamishness about the human skeleton in this country. Once a loved one is gone, we bury them in the ground and we try not to think about what time and nature does to them afterwards. The idea of bones protruding from the ground in our cemeteries sends us into a tailspin of horror and a sense that our dead are being disrespected in some way. We certainly don't display the bones of loved ones, at least not most of us. And why is that? Obviously, it has to do to cultural and religious reasons. But when we look at the fact that a good portion of Americans are transplants from other countries, whether it was 200 years ago or 2 years ago, you would think we would have a more diverse way of looking at skeletons. And in some cases, I think we do. But those pockets of culture are small in comparison to the larger numbers of people who say skeletons should stay buried number. I think we do have a fascination with the macabre, which is interesting to me that we consider skeletons part of that category, but many of us don't like to admit it. Take Paris, for example. 6.2 million Americans visit Paris every year, and 550,000 tourists visit the Paris catacombs each year. And although I couldn't find any statistics about Americans specifically, we have to assume it's a rather large number. We even have sayings like skeletons in the closet, which implies they should stay where they belong, hidden in the dark. Or, I have a bone to pick with you. A way of saying you want to discuss something that's bothering us, and although one of you might prefer to leave the issue buried, it's going to come out, and it will be unpleasant. So I wanted to take a look at 3 different cultures in which skeletons are not kept hidden, where the body of the deceased loved ones is celebrated and decorated and revered. In parts of Madagascar, it is widely believed that the dead are intermediaries between the living and God. They believe that there are only the living and the afterlife, and that the spirit of a loved one remains attached to its earthly body until it fully decomposes, which can take quite a while. So during the years of that process, the ancestors, which are still part of the living, can intervene in life on earth, influencing good fortune. When a loved one passes away, they are wrapped in silk shrouds and carried head first into a family tomb. Inside the tomb, they are laid face down on a shelf. Then, 5 to 7 years later, the Famadahana ritual can occur, but only after the spirit of the deceased loved one visits a family member in a dream, requesting warm clothes. What happens then? The oldest living member of the family organizes a big reunion. The planning can take up to a year, and a local astrologer is called in to determine the best date for the turning of the bones to occur. Guest lists are long, including all family members and townspeople, and the festivities are traditionally divided into 2 or 3 days. Family members travel from all over to come together, eating and drinking for 2 days. In many cases, this may be the first time families have gotten together since the last Famadahana. At first, the family eats and drinks a huge meal, made from all the items the guests have brought with them. They pool all the ingredients together, generally meat and rice, and they make sure everyone is well fed. Then the family dresses in their best outfits, and musicians play trumpets, drums, and flutes as they walk to the family tomb. The crypt is open, and several of the wrapped bodies are removed. If it is the first time for a loved one, they are removed feet first. The family gathers around as the ancestors are placed on reed mats and their silk shrouds are carefully removed. I'm assuming they're checking to see if the ancestors' remains are closer to being fully decomposed. And if so, that would be great cause for celebration because it means they are closer to the afterlife. New silk shrouds are carefully wrapped around the body, and family members can add small gifts, things that the ancestor enjoyed in life, like perfumes or candies. Then the wrapped ancestor is lifted over the living's heads and carried around, joining in the dancing and celebrating of the family. Before sunset, the bodies are brought back into the tomb, head first, and placed gently back onto the shelves, face down. The tomb is shut, and the family awaits the next dream call from another ancestor. This turning of the bones is relatively new. Its origins can be traced back to the 1820s, when a large number of Madagascar men were killed during wartime, and their remains were sent home from other places in the world.
Really? I was thinking it was probably way older than that.
Nope. There's another tradition, this one involving human skulls, that has had a huge rise in popularity in recent years, although the practice has been around for centuries. The Yatitas in Bolivia, South America. The Amara people of Bolivia have existed for thousands of years, and so has their annual ritual of carrying decorated skulls. Although it sounds similar to the Day of the Dead, it's actually not. The Day of the Dead is about personal ancestors and the inevitability of death. The Yatitas isn't, because in almost all of the cases, the skulls being honored and decorated don't belong to anyone the person actually knows or is related to.
Huh. Interesting.
According to Amara beliefs, humans possess 7 souls. After you die, 6 of your souls go to heaven, but the 7th remains trapped in your skull. In order to appease the remaining soul, the skull must be cared for and honored. If the remaining spirit is happy, they will bring fertility, luck, and protection to you and your home. Farmers would even bury random skulls in their fields to ensure a fertile crop. When the Spanish invaded in the 16th century, they tried to completely stamp out the Yatitas tradition, putting those who kept a skull on trial for witchcraft and necromancy, but they weren't entirely successful. Some families held on to their acquired skulls for hundreds of years, even if who it belonged to was forgotten over time. Since grave sites in Bolivia are not guaranteed in perpetuity, and skulls can also be bought from medical schools after they have been used, or from archaeological sites, it's not as difficult as you might think to obtain one, even in more modern times. But it really isn't about who it is, it's about how the guardian of the skull connects with it. It's not uncommon for them to be passed on to other people if the living owner senses that the personality of the deceased doesn't mesh with their own. Although the way some skulls are obtained might be objectionable to most people, regardless of their cultural background, the skulls themselves are actually being incredibly honored. Many are placed inside a glass box and adorned with flowers as well as hats for warmth, and sometimes they put glasses on them. But others may be simply placed on a table, their skull wreathed with an abundance of flowers. Many are draped in jewelry and have offerings such as cacao beans and money placed beside them. On the morning of November 8th each year, people walk with their skulls to places like the La Paz Cemetery. They set up rows and rows of skulls, each one labeled and displayed proudly. By afternoon, thousands of people, like 5,000 to 10,000, are lined up outside the cemetery gates, waiting to be let in. They are there to pay homage and give their respects to a particular skull that they may have given homage to the year before and received positive results. The souls inside these skulls are believed to take great comfort in these offerings and will bestow luck and protection and fertility to thousands of people in return.
I've seen pictures of that. It's pretty incredible. The number of skulls and all the flowers they use to decorate them.
The tradition of decorating not just skulls, but entire skeletons can be found in Europe as well, specifically Germany, Switzerland, Italy, and Austria. In 1578, a catacomb filled with 175,000 skeletons was discovered under Rome. Still reeling from the Reformation, the Catholic Church sent these skeletons to churches all over Europe as a way to replace holy relics that had been banned. Once they received them, it seems that the church officials went a step further, turning these unknown skeletons into incredible works of art. If you look up bejeweled skeletons, you can find breathtaking examples. Most of them are covered in gold beadwork, precious gems, crowns of gold, and intricate, delicate lace. Some are swathed in brocade robes with gold necklaces and rings on every finger. The robes may be covered in tiny seed pearls and intertwined gold braid. The skulls may have gemstones placed in its eye sockets and have a wreath of gold leaves on its head. Some are so covered in precious stones and gold work that you might mistake them for a posed mannequin, except for the very real skeleton hands protruding from the fine cuffs and the fine mesh-covered skulls above velvet collars.
I've seen pictures of those too, and it's really hard to paint a picture of just how incredible they are in just words. So I highly recommend that everyone Google them to see just how extraordinary they are.
In some cases, the identity of these bejeweled skeletons are completely unknown. No one has any solid idea who they once were. But they must have been important to be decked out so extravagantly. Historians, like I said, believed that the bejeweled skeletons were created not out of any religious belief per se, but in protest against the Reformation. During the Reformation, most of the church's holy relics were banned, and so the thought is that the clergy at first perhaps adorned these random skeletons as a secret way to rebel. But the Catholic Church in Rome actually embraced them. It became highly desirable to have one of these bejeweled skeletons on display in your church because the excess of jewels and gold adorning their bodies was presented as a symbolic promise of the wealth you would receive in the afterlife.
Clever.
Church officials thought that seeing these ornately decorated skeletons dripping with these jewels and gold would inspire religious fervency. So artisan monks and nuns from different orders began to specialize in their own unique decorating style. Some covered the skull in wax to mold a face. Some painted the skull with eyes before placing the thin mesh over the top to preserve it. But these artisans weren't trained in anatomy, so in some cases, female skeletons were dressed as men and vice versa. Or missing bones were replaced from other skeletons and might not be joined exactly as they should be, or the replacement part wasn't the right size in relation to the rest of the skeleton.
Well, that would make it harder to identify who they are then.
Regardless, they were a massive hit, and pretty soon, it wasn't just churches who had them. Wealthy families began to have them in their own private chapels, too, representing specific saints. This could solidify their specific power within a church community. Even fraternities and guilds got into it, obtaining one to represent the saint connected to their profession. Altogether, Rome sent out over 2,000 bedecked skeletons to other sites around Europe, and they weren't cheap. Unfortunately, as you can tell by where this is going, it became all about money and power and showing off, rather than about honoring the dead. Eventually, the craze died out during the Enlightenment. The skeletons were suddenly viewed with distaste, because they were so extravagant and covered in an amount of wealth that most people would never achieve in multiple lifetimes, and that's why historians think they were ultimately hidden away and purposely forgotten. But they were found again, and the biggest collection of bejeweled skeletons is in the Basilica in Waldshausen, Germany. If you visit there, you can see 10 of them lining the walls.
That's pretty cool. You know, I did see relics when I was in Italy, and I mean, this was like 20 years ago, and I had no clue what they were until I got up close to them, and I was like, I think that's a finger. But to see the full bejeweled skeletons, I just think that would be really cool.
I've seen pictures online, and they are amazing.
They're phenomenal. You can't believe there's actually a skeleton under there. Hey, did you know? Otto the octopus was a prankster. Living at Germany's Sea Star Aquarium, he was known to move objects in his tank. He would even throw them when he was tired of them. But when the lights kept shorting out at the aquarium, no one suspected Otto the octopus could have anything to do with it. Boy, were they wrong. It seems Otto was incredibly annoyed by a particular spotlight that shone into his tank. And taking matters into his own tentacles, Otto repeatedly sprayed a jet of water at the light until he killed it. And the rest of the power. Who'da thunk it?
So, Beth, do you want to tell us where your mind wandered this week?
Sure. So I was thinking that we hadn't covered a good old-fashioned haunting in a bit, so I thought I'd talk about the Emily Morgan. The Emily Morgan Hotel in San Antonio, Texas, is relatively new, only operating since 1984. So why has it been voted one of the top 3 most haunted hotels in the United States?
I don't know, but I'm sure you're going to enlighten us.
It'd be a pretty crappy intro if I didn't. So to start, it's within short walking distance of the Alamo, and it's named after Emily Morgan, the folk hero who was also paid homage to in the song The Yellow Rose of Texas.
Ah, the Yellow Rose. You know, I used to live in Austin, Texas in the 1980s, and there was a strip club named the Yellow Rose there. And my childhood buddy was a bouncer there.
Well, that's kind of ironic, but I'll tell you why later. The building is very Gothic looking. It was built in 1924 in the Gothic Revival style, so it looks like a cross between a French chateau and a skyscraper. It also happens to be 13 stories high. But these things shouldn't necessarily mean we'd expect it to be haunted. But maybe the fact that it was a medical center for 50 years helps a little bit. So let's back up a bit. The ground on which the building was constructed is in very close proximity to the Alamo, where hundreds of men died during the battle between the Mexican forces and the Texans back in 1836. Emily Morgan, for whom the hotel is named, was originally named Emily West. She was born in New Haven, Connecticut, but because she was of mixed race, she was placed in indentured servitude at age 20 to a man named James Morgan. She arrived in Texas as a housekeeper in one of Morgan's hotels, but within several months, she was kidnapped by the Mexican cavalry.
Oh, no.
General Santa Anna himself was in charge of the unit, and he marched his captives to what is now Houston. His plan was to make short work of Sam Houston's troops. The story goes that Santa Anna had a liking for Emily, and on the morning of the planned battle, he invited her into his tent. Different versions tell different ways that Emily preoccupied the general, but needless to say, Santa Anna's men rode into battle without him, and Sam Houston's men beat the Mexican troops in just 18 minutes in the Battle of San Jacinto. So now you see why I said it was ironic that the club was named the Yellow Rose. But now Emily was stuck in Texas because she had lost her paperwork that declared she was a freed woman. As soon as Major Isaac Moreland vouched for her, she left Texas for New York. So she's a major folk hero in Texas history, and the hotel was named after her. Just 88 years later, in 1924, the 13-story Gothic Revival Medical Arts Building was constructed, the tallest building in San Antonio at the time. It has a triangular shape, mimicking the Flatiron Building in New York City. The bottom 3 floors and the top 3 floors were glazed with a terracotta finish, while the floors in between were made out of a light-hued brick. But the designers, Nix and Cameron, had a kind of strange sense of humor. They commissioned and installed terracotta gargoyles on the outside of their premier medical building, each one depicting a different malady. So some have wide open mouths with broken teeth. They're in perpetual toothache situations. Some clutch their stomachs. Some are curled into almost a fetal position, their eyes wide with pain. So maybe not exactly the type of comfort you want to give ailing patients who walk through the front doors.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't be going there to get any of my teeth pulled.
The medical center itself housed over 100 doctors and could accommodate 400 patients at one time. The bottom floors were used as office space, and the basement was the morgue. One theory is that the surgery and patient rooms were on the upper floors because those windows could be opened and those rooms aired out, while the basement would keep its smell well contained. The medical center also had its own crematorium on site. The Medical Arts Center, considered the best in San Antonio, operated for 50 years until 1976. So it may be the perfect storm. It was built on a site where men died. It was named after a woman who was instrumental in those deaths. And it was a medical center where life and death were the focus for 50 years. So when you stay there, or if you work there, you should expect the unexplainable.
Yeah, I can imagine people there have had some interesting encounters.
Well, there's the elevators, for starters. They tend to move on their own, stopping and opening on random floors. Now, that could be an electrical issue, but it's also unnerving if you're at the front desk and all of a sudden the elevator arrives and opens and you put a smile on your face to say good morning to a guest and no guest emerges. Or maybe you are a guest and as you approach the elevator, it suddenly opens and you move aside to let the passenger or employee off and the elevator is empty. I mean, that's pretty creepy.
That is very creepy.
Other minor occurrences might be that room doors suddenly open and shut for no reason, or the phone calls that come into the front desk in the middle of the night from unoccupied rooms, and there's no one on the other end. According to the official hotel website, a sales manager returned to her room after dinner to find her bathtub filled with blue water. And hotel housekeeping staff will make the bed and then turn around to find the pillows thrown on the floor. But it seems as if specific floors are known to have all kinds of paranormal activity too. The 7th, the 12th, the 14th, and the basement. So let's start in the basement and work our way up. Now, the basement is not accessible to guests, but employees who have to venture down there for various reasons often report the stench of burning flesh. It's understandable since that was where the crematorium was housed. It's not far-fetched to say that a smell like that would linger for a really long time after it was no longer used. I don't know if I would count a faint lingering smell as paranormal, but I also don't know if they're being overwhelmed by a strong stench in the windowless basement or like a lingering one.
Well, perhaps it's permeated into the material of the walls.
Right, but the orbs and the disembodied voices, those are a little harder to explain. And they're a really common report down in the basement. Even the Emily Morgan Hotel official website says that they have captured orbs on their video security cameras. The 7th floor reportedly has a ghost bride who is known to travel from room to room. She has been seen by both employees and guests. Imagine being fast asleep only to be woken by a blood-curdling scream at 3 a.m. Concerned that someone has been horribly harmed or is being harmed, you call the front desk, only to be told that they have been called many, many, many times before, and they have no explanation. Then, as you shakingly return to your bed, you see a white apparition emerge from the wall and float across your floor to disappear through the closed door. Or worse, you look into the mirror to steady yourself and see a woman in white peering over your shoulder in the reflection, only to whirl around and find it's just you alone in the room.
Yeah, that's a bit creepy.
The 7th floor was once the psychiatric floor, by the way, and despite trying, no one has been able to identify the anguished woman in white, which is kind of sad because I feel bad for her, actually. Like, I think if she had her name back or she could tell her story, I think she'd be more at rest.
It's always the woman in white.
I know. But you figure hospital white gowns.
Yes.
Yeah. But let's keep moving upwards. The 12th floor. Personally, this one is the one that creeps me out the most. I could handle the 7th floor stuff because I truly do feel bad for the woman in white, but the 12th is where it seems like mostly residual stuff happens and maybe even some time slips. Guests who stay on the 12th floor reportedly experience many strange things. For example, the door to their room may suddenly open even though no one is there, and then the water in their bathroom may suddenly turn on, run for a bit, and turn off on its own. Now, I looked because, as we've said before, we're skeptics. And from what I can tell from pictures online, they're not the sensor-activated faucets in the bathrooms at the Emily Morgan. They're actually the kind where you have to physically turn the handle.
Well, perhaps it could be a surge of pressure in the water lines also, because that would do it.
Possibly, but the fact that the hotel door opens and then the water turns on is creepy, especially since there are also reports of guests being woken by flashing lights in their eyes, which would be hard to explain on the 12th floor.
Yeah, I could see if, the door opened and the water turned on right after. That would be pretty ominous.
Yeah, and to me it sounds residual, as if nurses and doctors are entering the rooms to do rounds and running the water would naturally be part of those rounds. But to take it a step even further, guests have also reported seeing nurses and doctors in the halls on that floor, as if they are still going about their daily routines. And people have reported what sounds like hospital beds or carts being pushed down the hallway right outside their room in the middle of the night. Which, it's pretty interesting since, again, I looked online, and it seems like some of the hallways are not carpeted, but some of them are. So I'd be curious to know if they're hearing those rolling wheel sounds on carpeted floor, because to me, that would be a true haunting with disembodied sounds and things like that.
Yeah, that it would.
But if not, I guess it could be people rolling luggage down the hall or staff rolling cleaning carts. But even that to me would be like a one-off thing and not a repeated sound over the course of an evening, which is what people are saying. They're hearing it going back and forth for hours at a time. So, we are pretty skeptical. We tend to poo-poo a lot of claims about places.
Right. I usually say I don't believe it unless I experience it for myself. You got to kind of be there yourself to debunk things. It's just hard hearing about something or seeing it on TV and think, oh, I would do this or I'd do that.
Right. But we did have our own experience at the Tilly Pierce Inn at Gettysburg that we were totally not expecting. We were woken up in the middle of the night by the sound of someone coming into our room and walking across the floor. And we could clearly see that no one was in the room with us.
That was creepy. And we caught it on our digital voice recorder that I had recording all night. And you can listen to it on episode 4, I believe, where Beth and I did a story on the Tilly Pierce.
So, with that said, I'm sure many of these claims, since they're coming from multiple guests over multiple years, are true. But onwards to our last stop, the 14th floor. But remember, I mentioned a couple times that the Emily Morgan is 13 stories tall, so the 14th floor is really the 13th floor. And it's on this floor that the old hospital still seems to be operational. The 14th floor is where the expensive suites are, but guests often remark that they can still smell ointments and antiseptics and the smell of Band-Aids in these opulent suites. And it's on this floor that the old hospital still seems to be operational. The 14th floor is where the expensive suites are, but guests often complain that they can still smell ointment and antiseptic and the smell of Band-Aids in the opulent suites. This floor was once the surgical unit, and more than one guest has claimed that when they are about to exit their room, they catch a glimpse of the rest of the corridor out of the corner of their eye, and they could swear it's as if they are transported back to the days when it was a hospital, complete with medical staff. Many guests say that when they close their eyes to steady themselves, or close their door even, and reopen them, the scene is just a normal hotel hallway.
It's like a time slip.
It sure is. It's interesting that one of the superstitions about the number 13 carried over when they converted the building into a hotel. First, by naming the 13th floor the 14th, but also there is no room 1408 on that floor. It stops at 1407 because they claim that when you add up the 1, the 4, and the 8, you get 13.
I think the number 13 really gets a bad rap. Even when I worked as an EMT at our local hospital, our ER didn't have a room 13. The rooms went from 12 and jumped to 14.
Yeah, well, people have been associating that number with
so much superstition.
Right. There's also a legend about the swimming pool on the 12th floor. They say that it was constructed out of the scrap metal left over from the hospital.
Well, that'll do it.
All in all, the Emily Morgan may have rightfully earned its top 3 most haunted hotels in the U.S. ranking in 2015. And the hotel is not shy about recognizing its haunted status. They have a page right on their website that talks about the reported paranormal activity there. And they say right at the bottom of that page that they really encourage their guests to ask about it. So if we ever go to San Antonio, I know where we can stay.
Well, I wouldn't mind going to San Antonio. I only spent a brief time there. And, I'm always up for anything. So Texas as a vacation, that'd be pretty cool. And we could head over to Austin and hit up 6th Street for some food and drinks.
Well, just don't expect me to help you look for the yellow rose, or I might have a bone to pick with you.
Well, I used to know where it was, but it's been, 30-something years, so I imagine it's probably not even there anymore.
I would imagine not.
Well, Beth, I guess that about wraps it up for this episode. We'll see you all next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.
See you soon. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to traveling with you again to the places where our minds wander.
If you like what you heard, please take a moment and provide us with a 5-star rating and a comment on your favorite listening platform. It really helps us move up the list and become more visible on the podcast charts so new people can find us.
Thank you all for your continued support.
See you all next week for an all-new episode of Where Our Minds Wander.